Hello, everyone. I'm Liliana Śmiech, Vice President of Warsaw Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to Warsaw Institute event. We're honored today to host Sandor Galai, Head of MCC School of Social Sciences and History. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Parliamentary elections were held in Hungary on 3rd April to elect the National Assembly, also coinciding with the referendum. Prime Minister Orban, who has served in the post since 2010, as well as from 1998 to 2002, went up against Peter Marki-Zaj, who heads up an opposition coalition. So could you please tell me what is this exact result of the election and whether is it surprising?
First of all, it's not yet official. We have to wait a few more days to get the official data. But after processing 98% of the votes, it seems a clear victory, a kind of landslide victory, and I would say a surprising victory for the ruling incumbent party coalition, Fidesz and Christian Democrats. They won altogether 135 seats out of 199. That's more than two-thirds of the seats, offering them a constitutional majority, a constitutional control over the assembly. The joint opposition is not a fully united opposition. It's a coalition of six parties led by Mr. Marki-Zaj, who was not really able to form a party or not willing to form a party. So he represented a movement officially. And they won altogether 56 seats in parliament, with 35% of the popular vote on the party list, joint party list. Fidesz, the ruling party, won 53% of the votes, popular votes cast for the party list. And we have two more players in parliament. One is a small radical right party, the so-called Our Motherland or Our Homeland. These are the two possible translations in English. They won 7 seats altogether. This is their first time to qualify in a parliamentary election into the parliament. And we have one more minority member winning a seat representing the German minority.
And you said that the result is surprising. Could you please elaborate a little bit on it?
Yes, all the polling agencies forecasted either a neck-and-neck race between the opposition, joint opposition, and the ruling party. And those are mostly polling agencies affiliated with the left, or the others which were more independent or coming from the right, they forecasted a solid victory for the ruling party, but no one actually forecasted a two-third majority. So it was surprising because the joint opposition lost a considerable share of votes compared to the previous election, where they ran separately, and everybody expected them to join their forces and to attract more voters than previously. Compared to that, this was a surprising defeat for them, and as a result of the mixed electoral system in which the majority component dominates, the ruling party, which can win most of the individual member districts, gets highly overrepresented in parliament. And this is why Fidesz, with 53%, obtained more than two-thirds of the seats. But no one actually expected Fidesz to beat its previous record. To win 53% was the overall record of Fidesz. They have never won so many votes in parliamentary elections.
And what are the reasons for such a defeat for the opposition? Was it because there were so many different parties, or what's the exact reason?
There are several reasons. One is, of course, the heterogeneity of the opposition coalition, which included parties coming from the left, some of them with far left affiliation. And also they had a party which used to be from the extreme right, Jobbik Party, which was a far-right party, an anti-Jewish, anti-Roma party, and they tried to moderate that tone. They tried to become a people's party, moving towards the center. And nevertheless, they had in their past shady comments from some of their MPs or politicians. So in itself, it was very difficult to speak with one single voice. When they had to present unified messages, that was usually not more then we would like to replace the government, we would like to restore democracy, we would like to beat Prime Minister Orban. These were the main catchwords. Apart from that, another problem of the opposition was the not so harmonious cooperation between its leader, who was outsider compared to the six parties, and the parties themselves. One has to know that we also had a primary election in the autumn for the opposition to select the single member district candidates, to have one single candidate in each constituency, as well as to select the prime ministerial candidate. And that primary election was surprisingly won by Mr. Márki-Zay, who came from outside of these six parties, and he was able to mobilize a few 100,000 youth voters. And the reason for his success was his very strong claim to replace and renew the opposition. That was a kind of declaration of war against the incumbent opposition parties. And he, after his electoral victory, was more or less concerned and convinced of his capability to lead the opposition. He believed that he was the number one leader of the opposition parties. And in the forthcoming months, in November, December, January, these opposition parties, and especially the party leaders, told him that it was not his role to lead the coalition. Formally, he was the leader, but in fact, when it came to the ranking of the candidates on the party lists, or when it came to putting together the program, or when they had to organize mass demonstrations and people were on the stage, it was very clear that some of the opposition parties, the two largest ones especially, were not willing to support Márki-Zay, and they decided many things instead of the leading candidate for the prime ministership from the opposition. So there was a tension within the coalition, opposition coalition. That was another factor. And the third factor was, of course, related to the campaigns and the campaign promises, which in the last month, when we had the war situation in the neighboring country, in Ukraine, which was attacked by Russia, practically I would say it redesigned everything. The original messages, which were about policy achievements, which were about negative campaigning and the party leaders, and also about some tactical messages, how to redesign the whole electoral system, how to make it either more democratic or how to make it more progressive, not to return to the past couple of years. These were overcome by the war situation, and that simplified the whole political picture, with the opposition claiming that we should not have a prime minister who was so closely affiliated with Russian President Putin. We should not have a prime minister who was willing to open Hungary's diplomacy towards the East and not making strong enough commitment to the West. That was the message by the opposition. While the ruling prime minister actually campaigned with a very strong choice between stability and remaining outside the war zone if someone voting for Fidesz, while getting more risks, endangering the stability of Hungary if voting for the opposition. That was a simplified picture at the very end. And public opinion polls suggested two things. One, that most of the Hungarian households and citizens are very much in favor of stability, which can present, of course, security and financial stability. Second, that Prime Minister Orban enjoyed a much higher approval rate among the electorate than the ruling party itself. And in the case of the prime minister candidate of the opposition, the situation was just the opposite. Mr. Márki-Zay had a poorer performance than the joint opposition parties altogether.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned the war in Ukraine. I just would like to very quickly ask you, like, what role exactly did the war in Ukraine play in the election campaign? What narrative was pursued by the opposition, and what narrative was pursued by Fidesz in general?
Yeah, the opposition advocated for a very strong loyalty and support for the Western allies. And they actually claimed by several politicians that if the NATO decides we should send troops, if the NATO decides we should send weapons, we should also advocate the stationing of NATO troops in Hungary. That was their approach to secure Hungary's future. Mr. Orban, Prime Minister Orban, he had a different approach. He said that we should keep Hungary as far from this conflict as possible. So we should be loyal to NATO and the European Union when it comes to voting for joint actions. But since Ukraine is not a NATO member, we as a country, Hungary, cannot be obliged to participate in supporting Ukraine with weapons or troops. And the government's message was to stay out of this conflict. These were the two basic narratives.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. And could you tell me what are the predictions for the Hungarian government's foreign policy shaping up in the near future? What are the ideas and proposals for the nearest future?
I think it will partly continue the old policy line, that is to say, a very strong focus on economic relationships, a very strong focus on energy security and physical military security. Nevertheless, it seems that the government is committed to continue as an EU member country, as a NATO member country, with all its obligations. And the future relationship with EU institutions, Western governments, will also very much depend on the actual developments when it comes to rule of law procedure, when it comes to criticism of the quality of democracy. If it continues along the same way, it will be a confrontational policy, probably in Hungarian foreign policy. If they can soften the tone, if they can come over these conflicts, Hungary can behave in the same way like it was at the beginning of the conflicts. I do not expect major disruptions. The current prime minister and his government was convinced that the EU should become more competitive. The EU should actually have a pragmatic relationship towards Russia. Now, with the war, this is not possible for a while. Now, the Hungarian government supports sanctions that are more damaging for Russia than for the sanctioning countries. This is why the Hungarian government, along with the German government, became an advocate of keeping the energy issue outside of the sanction zone. But it seems that the government is still determined to continue a relatively smooth relationship with China and other rising Asian countries, while meeting most of the obligations from the Western partners, be it the United States and the NATO countries or the European Union with its institutions.
There are some voices in the European that, because of very strong position now, Hungarian government can be a little bit afraid of losing European funds forever. Is there any discussion like this in Hungary, or is it just the voices in the European Union?
We can see arguments pro and con, of course. We already had some analysis that Hungary could survive without EU funds. Sooner or later, Hungary would become a net contributor to EU budget. We have that scenario and we have discourse on that. But we also have claims that after such a strong legitimacy won in Hungary, the Hungarian government can expect probably a much better position, a stronger leverage in the European Council, and that can lead to a better relationship, and that can lead to more funds available. You know that the access to the recovery fund was suspended. Now there are many voices which claim that this cannot go on like that. Probably after this election, when so many observers could actually document that it was a democratic election with no major conflicts, with no major problems in terms of its democratic quality. There were quite many voices in the immediate responses claiming that Hungary can get access to the recovery fund after that.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandor, for joining us today. The event will be available on our Facebook, YouTube channel, and also warsawinstitute.org. So to be sure that today's event will be with those who might be interested. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you.